I've briefly made remarks regarding this topic in my past videos, especially the patch notes review and the Stone of Gaia video, but I felt it was appropriate to do a separate video on this topic with how much discussion there is going on at the moment. And that is the triple tank meta and my perspective on it, especially as an assassin jungle player. Much of what you will hear in this video has been mentioned in some way or another in the past, but I felt like it would be good to have some conclusive overview of my take on this and where I think we stand and where we should probably go from there, or what would help the meta, or if the meta even needs help. So if you've been living under a rock or you're simply not interested in the SPL at all, what we've seen lately is a triple tank meta being used in competitive by multiple teams multiple times, mostly Elevate, but it has been applied or in similar patterns being used by others as well. The triple tank comp typically consists of 3 Guardians or Warriors and 2 Hunters in addition. There are different variations here, obviously. You could, for example, have 2 Guardians, 1 Warrior, 1 Hunter and 1 Mage with a basic attack focus or similar, but generally speaking, you want to have 2 carries that can dish out a lot of damage over time in late game, a lot of DPS, and you want to have the rest being frontliners that then can soak up damage, which mix of Warriors or Guardians you prefer there is kind of up to you or up to your strategy. The tactic as such has been applied mostly in the Super Regionals and also in many scrims, but it trickles down to the more casual levels like the ranked level and the actual casual level as usual a little bit. For the majority, it's not quite there yet, and the question is if it ever will, because if the Guardians and the Warriors get nerfed before this is possible, the Hunters get nerfed, then maybe we'll never see this on the lowest levels of play. So in ranked etc, you'll typically have 2 frontliners max and then some carries along with them, or some sort of between characters like ability-based assassins or whatever. But still, we've, for example, seen a lot more Warriors and Guardians in the jungle, which then pushes out the more dominant Assassins and the few Mages that can be played in jungle. So overall, there's been a shift in the meta, in the jungle meta especially, over the past quarter of the year or so, depending on where you want to start, which part you want to exactly look at. First, we mostly had Warriors, and now we see some more Guardians along with them, while most Assassins don't seem to be in the best place. So while the relevance for casual and ranked is not quite as given here as it would be with, for example, item changes, the relevance is still existent. It's worth discussing when we see that according to the highest level of play, a certain strategy works much better, or certain characters in a certain combination work much better than most other combinations being put against that. Something like this can quickly be turned around. We've seen triple tank metas in the past, I think it was around Season 1, Season 2, and then people just find counter methods to them, and eventually those metas fade away again because of the counters that are there. Sometimes item changes are necessary to make that happen, but no matter what, a meta like that is never gonna stay forever. But the fact that a meta like this could even arise has certain reasons and certain things, mechanics and Smite, that I think are worth addressing and maybe putting some thought into them. 2 classes are hit by this the most, the ones that are not being picked, and that's Mages, typically the mid laner, and Assassins, typically the junglers. Those are the ones that you don't really need in a triple tank comp. Those are the ones that just kind of fall flat for the most part, as they don't really bring the tools to the table that you need. You need some that really soak up as much damage as possible and have a lot of crowd control, and you need some that do that consistent damage. Assassins are more designed for mid-game burst damage for the most part, with a few notable exceptions, and Mages are also kind of more designed for burst, often more late-game focused burst, but there is a problem with late-game burst. Even in late game, you will not exactly be able to blow up a tank. That's due to the fact that you have burst damage. Burst damage is supposed to take down a squishy very quickly, a weaker target, whereas the characters with consistent damage are the ones that are supposed to take down the tanks. Their damage output through tools like Sais and crit will be much higher than that of a burst mage, will more have an area damage and try to focus out the backline. In many cases, with a triple tank comp, neither mages nor assassins are able to execute their role as they're supposed to. There are not enough squishies to target out for the mages to get their burst off, or rather they may not even reach those if possible, and the assassins will not be able to do anything in the backline, as they will be locked down too hard by the triple frontline and all the crowd control they have, and then die before they can execute anything that they would like to. So what would we need for those roles to have a better chance at late game? Consistent DPS. And those characters exist. We have, for example, Kronos and Sol in the mage role, which are the AA mages, and we have Kali, Bakasura, or even Arachne among the assassins. Now the problem is that many of these characters, especially the assassins, just struggle at the moment. Those are the guards that can make use of Executioner, which at the moment objectively is just the better penetration or rather percentage reduction item, whereas Titan's Bane just got another nerf and got more expensive. Just not as good, and again it's more for ability damage, which isn't as strong in late game. So Executioner for those assassins would be great if those assassins were good enough. The other item is Sais, again something that works against very tanky targets, so you don't have to go for the backline, you can just go for the frontline instead. Same problem here. You can't do that because those characters are just not strong enough. Any AA assassin needs to be close to the enemy and will usually be stopped in their tracks before they're even there, and if they get there, they don't have enough crowd control immunity to somehow get through the tankiness of the targets that they're trying to hit before they're getting killed by all the lockdown and the damage from the hunters they're taking at the same time. There is no easy solution here, but there have been approaches. For example, we've seen those assassins that are more ability based go into tankier builds, namely Circat and Red Tusker, who are built with Ancile and Mystical Mail. They only then get Titan's Bane to get some percentage penetration to do a little bit more ability damage that way. Captain Twig was the first one to apply the strategy, and it does work, but often enough you will still end up on the short end of the stick if you are against a warrior jungle, for example, who will not be as dependent on getting the sufficient amount of snowball going compared to you. When it comes to mages, Hyris themselves have taken a different approach here and are buffing their items while nerfing magic protection. Obviously nothing that mages themselves can do, but what we also saw recently was mages going for Height of the Urchin just to be a bit more tanky themselves and survive the burst, which already took away a lot from burst characters in general. Now build variety is nice and I love creative builds, but at the same time it feels like these roles are kinda being pushed toward these builds more and more in order to compete with other roles that just naturally utilize these defensive item choices better. And why is that? Because especially assassins and mages are revolving around scaling. They don't have the highest base damage, they take some time to come online, but they scale very well in comparison with damaging items. Now this doesn't always hold true, so I don't want to lean too far out the window here and don't make any blanket statements, because in terms of stats you have very different stats within one role. For example, you have Ullr, who is way tankier than other hunters, and then you have other characters of other roles that are less tanky in comparison, so it's a bit wonky and it doesn't always match if you compare each individual character, but there's an overall direction in which we see this going. And these high base damage values are for early game pressure. This allows the support to help his early game weak, so to speak, ADC to get some better clear, or it used to at least, and now we see ADCs going solo in a dual lane more and more and more. Not so much of a dual lane anyways. And likewise, it allows warriors to compete in solo lane clear, and if we don't have that in solo lane, then we often see other roles going into solo as they can out-pressure the warriors. This approach is very unique to Smite, as clearing in Smite is relatively quick compared to other MOBAs, where a single wave in the early game will take you ages to clear. And this is on purpose. Smite wants to be more fast-paced in that regard, so you have more time to fight and less time to farm. It comes, so to speak, with a built-in issue though. Base damage is much better in terms of what it provides you with than scaling. Why is that? Again, in late game, the scaling doesn't matter that much unless it's absolutely ridiculous. In late game, your basic attacks do most of the work for most characters, and those who don't rely on basic attacks will typically go into some more defensive options in order to make up for that, or they will isolate out the squishies if they have the option to do so. Against a 3-4 squishies comp, this is possible. In early game, however, base damage does a lot more than scaling because you won't have sufficient power to back up your scalings yet. So, in early game, you have the advantage if you're a Guardian or the Warrior. In late game, you have the advantage if you're the Hunter or maybe the AA-based Mage or Assassin, if those are good. That only leaves ability-based characters with the mid-game, and here things are not as even as they sound. If you're falling behind a little bit by mid-game, your scaling won't matter as much as you will have less items than the opponent already. Makes you a lot weaker and a lot less impactful. Likewise, if the enemy hunter, for example, gets ahead, you may already not be able to trade with them anymore, because hunters still have pretty good scalings on their abilities, and they will already deal a decent chunk of damage with their basic attacks, especially if they already have their core items like Devos and Executioner. So as an assassin or mage, even if you're at the point of the game where you should really start to shine, you can still have a big issues trading somebody who will be much later than you later into the game. And that's just a bit awkward. Obviously, if somebody gets too ahead or you fall too behind, this is understandable. But if we, for example, have a slightly under-itemized level 11 assassin against a level 12 hunter who's got a decent amount of stacks, then the hunter will probably win, even though it should be the strongest moment of the assassin. And things are similarly bad if we look over to solo lane. Try trading a warrior that has already built a decent amount of defense and maybe is 2 levels ahead of the enemies because he farmed very effectively in solo lane. He doesn't even have to be ahead of the enemy solo laner that much, just ahead of maybe the enemy mid laner who has to share with way more allies. Suddenly the whole concept of having a strong moment in the game falls apart for two roles, and they kind of just alright throughout the game, or they more providing utility if they're Thor or something or whatever, but it generally doesn't work for most. There are exceptions like Nemesis, who doesn't depend on this as she has that protection steal, but that's not the normal case. You have these outliers who really just work through utility. And when you understand the gravity of the situation and what it means for certain roles, then it's interesting to take a look in that regard over to other games. In other games, you will not find a similar situation. An assassin will not be as locked down most of the time, as most games just don't have that much CC. They will deal a lot more damage in a short amount of time to make up for that. And similarly, mages will just be a lot safer overall and be able to apply a lot more of their ranged magical damage without running the risk of being punished so hard for it. There is a very straightforward way to counter this, which has often proposed already, but at the same time it's not that easy. The way is to nerf the base damage of the abilities of Guardians and Warriors and increase their scalings. This has been proposed by various pro players before, by various people in the community, and it should be a very obvious solution to the problem. Is it really though? Because it takes away a lot of damage from two roles that are generally not favored in terms of playstyle when it comes to them not being able to deal damage. As a support in Smite, a big part of the fun is that you're actually impactful in terms of damage sometimes as well, compared to other games where you're really just soaking up. This is why we, compared to other games, have a relatively high number of players who still like to play support. Taking away all those scalings would probably quickly remove a lot of players from this role as well, as they're no longer interested in it. Same goes for the warriors, who, as long as they don't build thorns, kind of end up being hunter bait if they don't pay attention, and that's their main complaint most of the time, which would then feel even more excessively pushed in that regard, as they can deal even less damage to the hunters and do even less against them. So you end up with some awkward rock, paper, scissors where you can't really please everyone, and no matter what you do, you can't do it right, which is probably why Hi-Rez has taken a very strange approach to it. We'll see how that turns out. I would say in conclusion here and sum this all up, but I really think that you have to see this in context, and I will not have a conclusion here. What I will say though is that whatever change or approach is taken here to maybe change up the meta if it is deemed necessary, my hopes for it is that it doesn't take away the fun for any players. And with that, thank you guys for watching. I would love to hear your opinions on this down in the comment section below. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out and it gives you the chance to win a code. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth out.